Hi, this is Paul. Some of you might remember Chris Arnade. It was, when did we do this video? I wish YouTube gave more precise dates. It was, November 5. November 5, 2020. Um, just into the pandemic. Did a conversation with Chris Arnade, who wrote the book Dignity, and really enjoyed my conversation with him. He's been walking the world, and one of the best ways to follow him is the way today in his Substack. And I mentioned one of his Substacks the other day, where he was talking about where he was talking about the change from Kampala, Uganda, to suburban Dallas, where he had to go and do some things. And he just recently, August 9, wrote another piece, and it just really touched me. You know, I haven't put out a lot of videos this week. It's the end of the day Friday, and I'm a little exhausted from everything. And it's not just the amount of work that you do; it's the kind of work, and it's the kind of work with people who are just sort of in a corner. They're stuck in one way or another. I mentioned in an estuary meeting that I have nothing to base these numbers on, but in my opinion, in the next 10 years, 10 to 20 years, America will probably lose 30% of its churches. And many of those churches will be the kinds of churches that, on a day-to-day basis, one way or another, try to bolster up the kinds of people that this particular Substack speaks of. I spent the last week driving around America. This is the first essay from that trip. I set off last Wednesday to spend 3 weeks driving around the U.S. talking to people about the American dream, with high expectations drizzled in nostalgia, since it was the copy of the project I'd done exactly 9 years before. After close to 4 years crisscrossing the world by jet and foot, I was looking forward to a road trip around the U.S., which I hoped would be a refreshing change and would give me a sense of where the mood of my country currently was, especially since there's an election in 3 months. And if there's one thing I learned from my prior political reporting, it's that you can't trust the media, Twitter, or just about anything else, I think, to tell you much of anything other than the fantasies of a sequestered political class. And if you want to know how voters see things, you need to go out and talk to as many people as possible in as many places as possible, especially those places successful people with good jobs have been fleeing for the last 50 years. Now, obviously, there's a selection bias going on with this, but it's not a bad one. And yeah, if I were to give one critique, it would be that many people that I think he's right in terms of, if you go to McDonald's, you're probably going to see a pretty good cross section. McDonald's is about as egalitarian an institution in America. You will probably be biased against the kinds of people that are predominantly seen in Instagram and even YouTube and definitely television, and the kinds of images that we like to portray. And it's often, the country often in many ways also sort of has this fetishized, I can never say that word the first time, fetishization of certain kinds of poverty, but always sort of with a different frame. And I've spent a lot of time with Freddie over these last 2 weeks. We spent a lot of time together because he's needed it, because, his mother fulfilled a role in his life, and some of his mother's relationships were around there. And I'm super proud of not just the people that you see on the Freddie and Paul show, but some of the people that don't want to be on the Freddie and Paul show, who've just really come around Freddie and his sister over the last couple of weeks. And there's going to be very much a concerted effort to do what they can. But I've told the story before. I went to the Dominican Republic fresh out of seminary. A lot of tempered idealism, because I grew up in Patterson. I watched my father minister, And of course, my father, in many ways, sort of gave me my first draft in my heart of what real life in America was. And of course, in the first ward of Paterson, that was predominantly, at least when I was growing up, poor and African American, people looking for at least a better step up from Jim Crow South, and hopefully in the industrialized North, things would go better. And for some, they went very much better. For others, not much better. Paterson was and continues to be a rough place. But Paterson is by no means alone in America. And especially in a campaign year, it's so easy for me to get cynical because I just simply don't believe so much of what either party has to say, or frankly, what very few politicians have to say. And I don't mean that to speak disparagingly about politicians. As a pastor, especially in a poor area, you get to know politicians, especially the lower level ones. And I've known many politicians who were good people. But the challenges are tremendously daunting. And in a city like Sacramento, where it's a political town, obviously, because it's the state capital, and in some ways the state is the biggest employer here. So many of the people of my church have, they've worked for state institutions, or they might have worked in state politics, and so, and many of these people, they so want to help, but when I talk about America losing a third of its churches, sometimes the things that government can do is really welcome and important, but government can't care, and government can't love. And so, you can get a disability check from the government. You can get an Obama phone from the government. You can get Medi-Cal from the government, but so much of my pastoral care time is sort of split between care for the soul and being something like a social worker. It just is. It's so often the gaps I fill. That style of reporting, something I did extensively for 8 years, came to be lampooned, so it could be dismissed as talking to Trump voters in Rust Belt diners, although the far more accurate description would be non-voters in McDonald's, since the majority of Americans who could vote don't vote, and diners are too fancy and expensive. And now in California, I don't want to get political, but I remember when they're going to raise minimum wage. They're going to raise the wage of fast food, not Panera, because Gavin Newsom is buddies with the owner of Panera. So if you bake bread, you can get out of the $20 an hour. And I don't begrudge anybody working at McDonald's their $20 an hour. But the reality is, a lot of poor people rely on fast food. They rely on fast food, maybe more than they should. But it's a reality. And when fast food prices go up, it hits all of them. Since the majority of Americans who could vote don't vote, the diners are too fancy and subsequently racially segregated for my liking, at least compared to the egalitarian by shared necessity of the Golden Arches. So in that spirit, my first stop was Scranton. And this just hits me so often because, of course, I grew up in New Jersey and I went to college in Grand Rapids, and so you just, long drive through Pennsylvania and Ohio, Sandusky, Granton, Wilkes-Barre, all the signs along the way of these little places. And, running errands with Freddie and running errands with how many other people that I take care of who don't care to be on YouTube. You just see. So in that spirit, my first stop was Scranton McDonald's, where I found nobody who wanted to talk, since the few who came inside were grabbing and going. Similarly, the downtown nearing dinner time was empty except for professionals dashing from cubicles to cars. And again, McDonald's super egalitarian. And the destitute hiding in nooks from a lingering heat, emerging only to ask for money, either via long lies or by pleas to my empathy. My hotel, a rundown, squalid place that at $45 a night was still extortionate, was at least social, with a buzz of long-term residency, which is what it was for everyone there but me, with people out smoking and drinking in only the fresh air and the view that they had. And, it just made me think of right now, California's Gavin Newsom is getting tough on homelessness. And, of course, there's a big cry in California. You're criminalizing the undeserving. And I just watch the politics go back and forth. And, yeah, they've moved a lot of people out of a lot of visible places. And I'm not going to criticize, the law enforcement dealing with it, because the truth is that there's cost to that, too. And for many people, again, I listen to someone like Alex O'Connor and I think, yeah, I understand. I understand the problem of suffering. But for me, the problem of suffering just twists the other way. And I think, surely there must be a God, and there must be a God who demands justice and will bring justice. And partly because so often I've seen how it's the gospel that for so many of these people helps them out. And even for those who don't sort of get cleaned up or set right or at least improved upon. I did this week's sermon on sanctification. So often it's the gospel that gives them whatever degree of solace they can get besides a nicotine stick or a bottle of booze. Kevin, sitting on his milk crate lawn chair, chain smokes crisscross cigars, was the most talkative and so not surprisingly the most opinionated, and certainly not a not-voter, at least in attitude. He was a lifelong Union Democrat who snapped back before I could finish asking, "What do you think the American dream is?" with, "It doesn't exist these days. It was ruined by Reagan in the 80s. And of course, if you want to talk to Kevin, you can leave your comments below. Not that he'll read it. Which pivoted into the chronicle of his last 50 years of ups and downs, and mostly downs, that began with, "I got a degree in computer science from University of Scranton," and ended with, "I don't have hope. I understand why there's so many druggies out there," peppered with detours into local gossip about who's the pervert, the guy drinking in the beat-up Accord watching us, who's hard-working, his smoking friend on the other side of the motel, who's an incompetent dumb thief, his brother, and so on, with most of his wrath directed at the Community Intervention Center, Trump, and the Sackler family. I don't know who the Sackler family is. The next morning, after a night of heavy rain, loud music, and unexplained loud blasts, Kevin was where I'd left him, joined by John and Dewey, who completed America's political triarchy of Trump's my man, John, Trump's an ignorant asshole, Kevin, and neither. Nothing's going to change. Nothing. They don't care about us people, do we? But some of them do. Again, I've met some good politicians in my life. I just saw that. Well, my thingy ain't working, so I gotta pause here on the button. Otherwise, I'll have Bandicoot mishaps. So someone on Twitter sent me Mark Halprin talking to Jordan Peterson, and I didn't listen to much of it, and I heard just a little bit from Peterson. What he had said before was that he tried like anything to see if he could get more Democrats on his podcast, and most of them wouldn't take up on it. That was disappointing to me. And Republicans would go on. Good for them. Have a good conversation. And then, I saw Mark Halprin, and I thought, oh yeah, I remember Mark Halprin. He used to be like, I think, ABC News. And then of course I Googled him, and he got me too'd, and now he's on YouTube and trying to build a channel and having political conversations. And it's the way of this world, isn't it? It's just the way of this world. Dewey and John were passing the time waiting for their boss to pick them up, but it was raining, which meant they'd probably miss out on the $150 cash they'd got for the day's work painting, and given rent and the shithole was $1,500, that really sucked. Both were less talkative than Kevin, although not at all out of impoliteness. John was a tad shy and a little confused why someone as educated as me wanted his views. He was from McDowell County, Virginia, and had come here for work and to get a change of location, a change of situation, since that was the only way to stop the heroin. He'd been on it a little way back when he was a kid, but then he came off of it with no rehab but by willpower, something all his high school friends and family didn't seem to have, which made him want to stay here, because if he'd went back, he'd judge them harder than God for putting needles in their arms. John thought the American dream was going downhill, while Dewey burst out laughing at the question. That's long dead. And then a soft-spoken condemnation of people on welfare, including some of the other residents who walk around all day doing nothing, drinking alcohol, shooting smack, getting $700 a week, while I work my ass off and get less than them. That ain't right, and I wouldn't vote for no politician who supports that bullshit, and they all support that bullshit. I tried to spend the remaining morning walking around Scranton talking to strangers, but the rain, the heat, the emptiness made for a desolate beginning to my second day, so I drove to Wheeling, West Virginia, hoping for something a little less despondent, a little more buoyant, but that didn't happen. Instead, I found I'd stepped further into the gloom. I remember Wheeling as a forlorn town, a busy, active, and alive one. Yet there was none of that this time, even though it was a Friday night. At least not downtown, which had the energy of a patient on life support. There still was a heartbeat, but it was feeble and artificial. Mike at the Karen pub was surprised. I was surprised it was so empty. Bemused by my naivete, there used to be 15 bars in that area, one on every corner. But those all died after the steel mills left, and we are all hanging on only because our regulars are too stubborn to go anywhere else. I was watching the traffic at the 3 little Obama phone tents outside the welfare office, right next to the smoke shop convenience store. And I was just thinking about how we are motivated. And I don't want to just focus on Chris's Substack, because the truth is, if you're going into a lot of these places and you're picking up people on the street, again, it's a selective bias. If you go into churches and talk to people, you'll find others. And again, Chris has done this. He's done it thoroughly. It's written about in Dignity. What's interesting to me is sort of the sample difference, both between overseas and here, partly because I did that, and also between the time and the manner, because one would expect he's done similar to what he's done. And again, none of this is to say that politics is bunk, although I tend to lean that way, because politicians do make a difference, and good policies can make a difference. And again, in terms of places to live, his prior post notwithstanding, walking Nairobi and then comparing it to Dallas, yeah, America's an immensely wonderful place to live. And I've lived overseas, and I've lived here in different places, and I've lived often in places that a lot of people don't want to be. And I've spent a lot of time with people that people avoid. But it's a beautiful country, and there's so much good here, and there's so many good people. And there are real opportunities here like there aren't in so many other places in the world, and that is, again, why so many people are really hard-pressed to try to get here, because one way or another they have a sneaking suspicion that even though there'll be some real losses, losing the community and the camaraderie of the places they leave, there'll be some real benefits for being here too, of course. My Jewish ancestors on my father's side and my Frisian ancestors on my mother's side all came for that reason at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. So I certainly don't want to badmouth my country, but none of this makes me any less committed to the gospel. In fact, it always makes me more committed to the gospel. Because although I've certainly helped out a lot of people in some very physical and material ways over my lifetime, I always see those things as stopgaps. And so often, to the degree that I'm able, the best thing that I can give them, if at all possible, and even in a small way, is the belief that God is good, and He has not abandoned this world, and whatever suffering they do in this world will by no means be the summary of their story, but in my opinion, incomparable to what He has for us. I've noticed recently that Fred talks to his mom through the Freddie and Paul show. It's a funny dynamic, isn't it? I can't point fingers because I finished my rough draft. I did the whole sermon today, which is not how I like to do it. I like to sort of do it through the week, but the week was busy. And the week was emotional, I'll say it that way. So I finished my rough draft, and it's 6 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and my wife's scrambling because SAC Unified, because this is a whole other story, but they're starting school 2 weeks early, and the school district remodeled her school, so they can't get into the classroom, so she's at her wit's end trying to get ready, and she's a Waldorf teacher, which means she has to do the whole 6th grade. I mean, she doesn't just do the same thing every year, so she's busy, and the kids are busy, and so I'm tired, and it's like, in some ways I'm just like Freddie. I'm not talking to Nancy, I'm talking to you, but why do I do this? I'm tired at the end of the week, and I'm feeling the weight, and then I read something like Chris, well, actually I read it far earlier this week, but I usually make videos about things that haunt me and hang with me. And I know I make a video like this, and I know I'll get worried comments, and the truth is I'll be fine. We take the dog to dog training tomorrow, and that'll be a good day, and I'll have a nice lunch with my wife afterwards, and I'll probably see my son and his new wife, and it'll be a beautiful day because fall is gorgeous here in Northern California, and I'll get to drive a car that I really enjoy driving, and I'll get some rest, and I'll be back at it scrapping with whatever, doing my silly commentaries on YouTube, and hopefully getting back to some Randos conversations again. So why turn on the camera when I'm tired like this? So don't worry about me. I'm fine. I really am. But at the end of a week like this, I usually sit with Nancy and one of Nancy's friends. You often hear her voice on the Freddie and Paul show. She doesn't want to show her face, but it'd often be the three of us after a funeral where, okay, all the chairs are put away and all the kitchen's cleaned up and everything's set right, and it's a one-horse church often, and you do the funeral, and you eulogize a friend, and you play your part, and you get everything set right, and you just sit back in a chair and be me and Nancy and another member to not be named, although some of you around here would know exactly who it is. And then we just talk. And then I shoo them out the door, and I lock up the place and turn off the lights and go home. And I think about the world. And I think about Romans 8. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to the sonship, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they have already seen? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. As he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God. For we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many sons, many brothers and sisters. And those he predestined, he also called. And those he called, he also justified. And those he justified, he also glorified. What then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own Son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? Who will bring any charge against those whom God has chosen? It is God who justifies. Who then is the one who condemns? No one. Christ Jesus, who died, more than that, who was raised to life, is at the right hand of God and also interceding for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? It is written, for your sake we face death all day long. We are considered as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loves us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither present nor future, nor any power, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. There's a great little video of Alex O'Connor talking to Chris Williamson. Only 73,000 views on Chris's channel. And it really touched me.
A lot of people care about religion in Christianity. And so do I. I think it's interesting. But it doesn't have that... The reason that so many people look up like the gym stuff or like how much protein should I be eating is because it's applicable. You know, they're excited about learning some actionable, life advice. But people know from the start.
They want to improve their life. They want to improve their life. They get a protein powder. They get in the gym. They get swole. They fix up their body. Maybe they can get a girl. They can get a job, and all that is great stuff.
They're probably not really going to get that from me because I'm being a critic. And so it's a little bit like I do a debate and I convince a bunch of people that like God doesn't exist. Like, hurrah, great, awesome. Now like
veils fell from their eyes. Go forth and find your own.
Now some kids have watched a video and they used to believe that their life had theistic purpose and now they're nihilists. Awesome, congratulations.
Feel guilty about that?
Not guilty, but because at least not recently, because I've tried to be very cautious about what I say, how I say it. And
you didn't used to be though.
No, because I was so wrapped up in the whole religion is evil and terrible, and you need to regain your spiritual autonomy and, think for yourself and all that kind of stuff. And, well, of course, I still think that's true to a degree, but I've begun to recognise that the emails that you see where somebody says, I became an atheist and I don't believe in free will and I'm having a bit of an existential crisis. Wow, yeah, this does actually... This stuff matters.
Literally true, but functionally false.
It matters, and you need to be ready to say if you're gonna stand up and say you don't think God exists, and someone says, "Okay, I agree with you. You've convinced me, but now I feel like my life doesn't have purpose." You better have something to say to that person, And that's a tall order. That's a difficult thing to shoulder, and so I try to be much more careful. And also, I'm trying to find something more affirmative to talk about, to do, to be. So now a lot of people are like, "Oh, you've gone a bit soft." Well, it's because I don't want to get up and be like, yeah, like cut this down, total bullshit. We're going to like debunk it, and then people go, yeah, awesome. So what now? Actually, I feel a little bit empty inside. I'm like, your problem.
Good luck.
It can't
Try
work.
nihilism.
So yeah, you know what I mean. So now it's more like, oh, let's do an interesting deep dive into Gnostic Gospels and biblical scholarship and all this kind of stuff, because I find it very fascinating. But it doesn't have that same, I'm going to like try to debunk your worldview and good luck.
How do you deal with it as a long-lasting atheist?
I don't know, but probably by being an agnostic. I'm not. I really cringe at the sort of a lot of comments and things I see on YouTube and online where people are just sort of like, well, it's all obvious bullshit and giving like quite rudimentary objections and things, but doing it with such confidence. And I cringe in the same way that I cringe when people say, well, obviously God exists. Look at the trees, whatever. You know, there is a version of that argument that works. You know, like I'm not that. I'm not that. You know, what is it? Like sometimes I feel like there's enough room for doubt.
So it's a great video. It's on Chris's channel. You know, Chris has, he flies around the world and has a big YouTube channel, and people listen to him. And yeah, who am I to point? I fly around the world. I have relatively big compared to some other ones, and people listen to me. It's always interesting how the generalizations just always fall short when you meet individuals. I mean, you sort of get used to reading people, but then they open their mouth and can almost always surprise you with something. Not always happy surprises, but surprises with something. So I really enjoyed that. I've really been enjoying Alex O'Connor. And then he made this video about, Trump and the head and the ear and Pope John Paul and the bullet. And on one hand, hey, fair enough. I understand. I understand how it's easy to laugh at people, and I'm. Anybody who watches me sometimes in the comment section, I can troll along with the rest of you, and it's in some ways just so easy. It's just so easy, but of course, it's one thing to poke holes at somebody else's worldview. It's another thing to fill those holes for yourself. And I'm certainly happy with what I have embraced. And it's hard to carry sometimes. I get that. It's hard to carry sometimes. But I would far rather believe in a God who weaves this story together, even with the kinds of things that none of us would dare write. But that this God is a good God and will bring this story to an amazing conclusion. Not just the big stories out there, but even as the possibility for our little stories, that we are more than conquerors. So I'll keep my worldview with as robust a sense of God's providence as the Catechism articulates. I'll take that. I'll take that. I'll take that exchange rather than what I see so many people left with. All right, I probably shouldn't make these videos when I'm tired at the end of the week and it's like, I should put something out for Monday, but here's something for Monday. And yeah, you don't worry about me. I'm fine. I really am. Deep down, I am a very joyful person. And you get to an end of a week like this, I just so often wish I could just fix things. And I'm not able to. I am not able to. But what I do have is faith. And what I do have is that through so much of what I've seen, even things that just seem absolutely soul-crushing or horrendous or insane, that God is able. That's what I believe. That's what I believe. So leave a comment.